This is one of the horrifying stories of a serial killer that will make your hair stand on end. From being curious about how killing feels, thirst for sex, to fantasizing about his own mother and how to kill her, and until he is labeled as one of America's most prolific serial killers. Who is Gary Ridgway? Why he was called the River Killer? Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer, was an American serial killer who was responsible for the murders of at least 49 women in the Seattle area during the 1980s and 1990s. He was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. Ridgway grew up in a troubled home environment with a domineering mother and an abusive father. He was described as a lonely and troubled child, and he struggled in school due to a learning disability. Mary Rita Ridgway, Gary Ridgway's mother. His family had some problems. They regarded his mother as being overbearing, and they claimed that while he was a little child, he saw more than one violent confrontation between his parents. Bus driver and frequent critic of the presence of sex workers was his father. Up until the age of 13, Ridgway struggled with bedwetting, and his mother would wash his genitalia after each incident. He would later admit to defense psychologists that as a teenager, he had conflicting feelings of resentment and sexual attraction toward his mother, and that he fantasized about killing her. After graduating from Tyee High School in 1969, Ridgway married Claudia Craig, his 19-year-old high school sweetheart. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy and was assigned to Vietnam, where he served on a supply ship and engaged in combat. While serving in the military, Ridgway frequently engaged in sexual relations with sex workers and developed gonorrhea. Despite being incensed by this, he continued this behavior unabated. Within a year, the marriage was over. After his arrest, Ridgway's friends and relatives were questioned about him and said that he was kind but odd. His first two marriages ended in divorce due to adultery on the side of both parties. Marcia Winslow, his second wife, said that he had choked her. During his second marriage, he converted to Christianity and began door-to-door evangelism, reading aloud from the Bible both at home and at work, and demanding that his wife adhere to their pastor's rigorous instructions. Ridgway would also frequently sob following sermons or Bible readings. Despite his convictions, Ridgway continued to hire sex workers and urged his wife to engage in sexual activity in public and improper settings, sometimes even in places where the bodies of his victims were later found. Women in his life claimed that Ridgway had an insatiable thirst for sex. His 3 ex-wives and a number of ex-girlfriends claimed that he frequently demanded sex from them. He frequently preferred having sex in a public place or in the woods. Ridgway said that he had a love-hate connection with sex workers and that he had an obsession on them. He routinely berated them for being in his area, but he also frequently used their services. Gary Ridgway declared in a statement read during his plea hearing that he detested prostitutes and didn't want to pay them for sex. Some have conjectured that Ridgway struggled between his lusts and his fervent religious convictions. Ridgway had a son named Matthew with his second wife, Marcia. Ridgway's killing spree began in 1982, and he targeted vulnerable women, many of whom were sex workers or runaways. He would often lure them into his truck or pick them up on the street, or he would lure them into his truck with promises of money or drugs, then take them to a secluded area where he would strangle them to death. He would then dispose of their bodies in wooded areas or in the Green River. Ridgway's method of killing his victims varied, but most were strangled to death with a ligature, such as a rope or cord. He would often dump their bodies in wooded areas or in the Green River, which gave him his nickname. Ridgway would sometimes return to the locations where he had dumped the bodies to have sex with them again, which led to the recovery of some of the victims' bodies. In some cases, he would also dismember his victims or engage in other forms of sexual violence. The vast majority of Ridgway's victims were young women who were vulnerable due to their economic or social situations. He specifically targeted women who were less likely to be reported missing or who were less likely to be the focus of an intense police investigation. Ridgway's crimes went unsolved for many years, despite his being a prime suspect. It wasn't until the advent of new forensic technologies in the late 1990s that police were able to link Ridgway to the murders through DNA evidence. Some known victims of Gary Ridgway, also known as the Green River Killer, were Wendy Lee Caulfield. Caulfield was only 16 years old when she was murdered by Ridgway in July 1982. She was last seen alive getting into a pickup truck, which was later identified as Ridgway's truck. Her body was found in the Green River, and she had been strangled with her own clothing. Deborah Lynn Bonner. Bonner was 23 years old when she was killed by Ridgway in April 1985. She was last seen getting into a pickup truck that matched the description of Ridgway's truck. Her body was found in a wooded area, and she had been strangled with a nylon stocking. Hikers in Auburn, Washington, near the West Valley Highway, discovered a skull on Tuesday, December 21, 2010, close to where Marie Malvar's remains had been discovered in 2003. Rebecca "Becky" Marrero, who was last seen leaving the Western Six Hotel on December 3, 1982, was identified as the owner of the skull. She was last seen leaving the motel near South 168th Street and Pacific Highway South. On February 11, 2011, Ridgway was officially charged with her murder, according to the King County prosecutor. On February 18, 2011, he pleaded guilty to the murder of Rebecca Marrero, adding a 49th life term to his previous 48. In his initial plea deal, Ridgway admitted to killing Marrero, but no charges could be brought against him because there was insufficient proof. Therefore, there is no change in his current incarceration status. Of all the killings, there are also some of his victims that was able to escape. One of them is Rebecca Gard. A 20-year-old Seattleite named Rebecca Gard made the decision to hitchhike home one rainy night in November 1982 after concluding a shift as a telemarketer. Ridgway scooped her up and offered her $20 in exchange for performing a sex act. She accepted after inspecting his identification from his place of employment, and they went to a trailer park where Ridgway suggested they walk into the surrounding woods. There, he attacked her and choked her. Gard fought back aggressively, driving Ridgway against a tree. "Not at this moment, please. I want to mature. I desire a marriage." In a 2010 interview, she described her feelings that evening as, "I want to have babies." After pushing Ridgway away, Gard fled to a nearby trailer, banged on the door, and was allowed inside. "I was like, this man is not going to murder me," Gard said. She put off calling the police because she was afraid she would be in jail for her prior drug usage and sex work and that they wouldn't accept her story. In the 1984 documentary series Invisible Monsters, she said, "I had finally worked up the bravery to talk to the police, so one day, out of the blue, I gave them a call." She also knew the name of the trucking firm Ridgway worked for because she had seen his identification at work. The killer admitted to knowing Gard, saying that he hired her for sex and that he strangled her only after she bit him. Despite being a prime suspect in the killings for years, Ridgway managed to evade capture due to a lack of concrete evidence. However, in 2001, advancements in forensic technology allowed authorities to match his DNA to samples found on the victims' bodies. Ridgway was arrested and ultimately pleaded guilty to 49 counts of murder. In 2003, Ridgway was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As part of a plea deal, he agreed to provide information about his victims and assist in locating their remains. He is currently serving his sentence at the Washington State Penitentiary. Ridgway's case remains one of the most notorious in American history. Thanks for tuning in to our YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell to stay up to date with our latest releases and updates.